to Concussion Talk podcast. My name is Nick Mercer. I write Concussion Talk blog, www.concussiontalk.com. I've also written an ebook called Detour, a link to which you can find on the right side of any of my Concussion Talk pages. It's about cycling across Canada in 2002 and my brain injury in 2003. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Concussion Talk, or by searching Concussion Talk on Facebook. This is the 9th episode of Concussion Talk podcast, and in it I'll be talking to Alex Rebchuk and Harrison Brown of the University of British Columbia's School of Kinesiology. Both are studying the effects of football hits on brain function. Alex is doing his master's and Harrison is doing his PhD research. Generally, both are in Vancouver, BC, but today and this week they're in Quebec City because their team, the UBC Thunderbirds Football team, is in Quebec City for the Canadian University Championship game, the Vanier Cup. I will now let them introduce themselves and talk more about their research. Okay, I'm on the phone with Alex Rebchuk and Harrison Brown, and I will now let them introduce themselves and talk about their research. So I guess, Harrison, you want to go first?
Sure. So my name is Harrison Brown. I'm a PhD student in the University of British Columbia, and my thesis title is Human Sensory-Motor Physiology Following Concussive Injury. And my research is more laboratory-based stuff, so I'm trying to understand the underlying physiological consequences of concussive injury. And the idea is that once we understand that, then we can better understand how to diagnose and rehabilitate the injury.
Okay. Well, that's actually really valuable stuff. So, Alex.
Perfect. My name's Alex Rebchuk. I'm a master's student at the University of British Columbia, working for Jean-Sébastien Blouet. My working thesis title is investigating impact, exposure, and functional neurological status in collegiate football players. So what I'm looking at is a more clinical-based study trying to relate or determine whether any relationships exist between impact exposure in college football players and their functional, essentially their brain status.
That's equally interesting. So I mean, both you guys are studying different aspects, but using the same sensory system, the same sensor you got. So if maybe you talk about how you're researching, how you're studying these players, what is the xPatch as they call it, and how you got to doing it, and who are your subjects for this research?
So I'll talk a little bit about the xPatch. So what it is, it's accelerometer. It was developed by X2 Biosystems. It's a company out of Washington State. So they're based out of Seattle. What it is the players wear it behind their right ear. So it's a little adhesive. It's kind of the size of a quarter that they just put behind their ear. And what it does is it tracks essentially every impact the players get. So we can get both the number of impacts a player will get during either a practice or a game, as well as the magnitude of each impact. So essentially we get a G-force reading of how large each hit is during the game.
Yeah, it also gives the direction as well. So that's one thing that's quite helpful. It's just knowing the direction of the hit. So whether it's from the front of the head, to the side of the crown, or even the back of the head.
So as well, in regards to our participants, we're working with the UBC football team these past 2 seasons. So we have about 14 this year and about 16 last year. So we have about 30 participants total. On the team, we have a variety of players and a variety of ages, and what we do is we have them wearing it each practice and game for the past 2 seasons.
Okay, so this started 2 seasons ago, so sorry, my headphones came off there for a second. So UBC's football team won 2 games last year, is that right? And they're in the Vanier Cup, that's why you guys are in Quebec City?
Yes.
So that kind of increases your research, your scope, not scope necessarily, but the frequency of the number of readings you can get.
Yeah, so basically every extra game we get, because they made the playoffs, we got an extra game, and then because they won Can West, we got a Canadian semifinal game, and then they won that again. So we're getting the finals on Saturday. So we're actually getting 3 games more of data.
Nice.
So it's a pretty significant increase in the amount of information we're receiving.
It's a win-win-win, I guess. Yeah. So why is why does the sensor go behind the right ear and not anywhere else on the head or on the body for that matter? Is there a
So
reason, or is that just?
for we you can put it behind the left ear. I won't get too much into it, but the company at some point had a mouth guard piece, but they no longer do that. Why we use the right ear is if you feel behind your right ear, there's a little bony bump called the mastoid process. So essentially how the accelerometers or the sensors are calibrated is they're calibrated to the center of mass of the head. And to do that, they use an anatomical measurement from that bony landmark there. And we just use the right ear for consistency's sake.
Yeah, so you can put it on the left or the right side, and people do use the left side. The difference is that the algorithm it does to compute the impacts is obviously different from the left to the right.
Oh.
But we just only use the right for consistency.
Oh, gotcha. So you said it's taped behind there, right?
Yeah, so it's basically put on kind of like it looks like a Band-Aid almost. And so we place it on the Band-Aid, on the Band-Aid, we spray their heads with some adhesive, we place the Band-Aid with the sensor on the head, and then we actually cover it again with another adhesive.
So you guys put their sensors on their heads
Yes.
yourselves?
Yes.
And just what positions do you get normally? Is there any consistency of positions or from last year? Last year's that they've did two more than this year. So
It's pretty widespread. We can't specifically tell you which players we have,
yeah, no, of course not. No.
just for privacy reasons. But we have a broad spectrum of positions. We
Defense
went
and
in,
offense?
yeah, defense and offense and special teams. So we've got a pretty good idea of the we'll have an idea of the differences between different player groups. And there's obviously ones that are more high impact than others. Also, we've got starters and backups, so we also know the differences between somebody that is playing regularly versus somebody that's not playing regularly.
Wow, okay. So the question I was going to ask was, I forget now. I have a bunch more, but I swear there was a. Okay, that's all I just say. Why this? What? So did you guys pick football when you said you want to do this research, or did football kind of pick you?
We chose it. Just the general area. A lot of the research is done in football because it is a high impact sport, and their season is quite condensed. I mean, we could do hockey or something like women's soccer, but the seasons are much longer, and so then it's more difficult to do it with a longer season. Whereas with football in Canada, it's only about 4 months. So you have 4 months where you're collecting data basically every single day. Okay. And then you get a kind of a break to analyze it.
A lot of the research with this equipment and with concussion coming out of the United States has been done with football. So there's that as well. There's not too much going on with hockey, just because it's only prevalent, or hockey's only well played in Canada.
Right. Okay. Actually, I remember the one question I asked you is, so what do you guys put these sensors on the body just for games or for practices as well?
So we have them wearing it essentially every time they're on the field we're calling them team sessions. So in practices and games. So anytime they're wearing their helmets on the field, whether it just be a light practice, say after a game on Monday, or whether it's a heavy practice during training camp, we have them wearing the sensors.
Yeah. So basically, the idea behind that is from day one of training camp. So when they come in from the off season until the final day of the season, we have an idea for these players for the pretty accurately the number of hits they've taken and also the overall exposure.
Okay, so it does you say you have an algorithm that you get certain data from the accelerometer and you convert that to your data you want. So is that taking into account helmets, like that they're wearing helmets, or what kind of helmets they're wearing, or just looking at the movement of the head?
Not really. That's the one benefit of the xPatch, is that it's adhered to the skull in theory. So we're not the helmets. You don't think about them because we're looking actually how the skull moves.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter in our situation what type of helmets they're wearing. You could put it on non-helmeted players such as rugby players, and you'd still get an idea of how the skull is moving. And from that, you can't make an accurate measure of how the brain's actually moving, but you can see how many times the skull is getting hit or how hard the skull is getting hit.
Yes. So the other big system that people use, it's called the HIT system, and that's one with the sensors in the helmet. And kind of the crucial problem with the HIT system is that it's measuring forces to the helmet, not to the head. And so, for example, we know there's times where players' helmets will come off, or they'll shift during the impact, or some guy will grab it and move it around. And so you're not necessarily getting a good picture of what's happening to the skull. And once you have a picture of what's happening to the skull, then you can make assumptions about the brain. So that's kind of why we're going with the xPatch rather than the HIT system.
There's one situation last year that we saw during the game where one of our players wasn't wearing a helmet. It had fallen off and he ended up getting hit. And the benefit of having the xPatch on the skull is in that situation we still got the impact. Whereas if they were wearing the HIT system, which is embedded within the helmets, we wouldn't have been able to see that impact.
You mentioned that you could have done this on women's soccer, rugby, or hockey, but so what is generally the reception from UBC, the football team, and other teams and other sports teams that may want or be interested in this participation in this sport, this research?
Well, the UBC football team, they've been tremendous in supporting us. They've been great. We're not really giving anything to the players. They're participating in this project really will benefit the future generations, whether that be the children of some of the players or their relatives who may be playing the game. For them, it's really just a time commitment, and they've been absolutely tremendous at giving us about 15 minutes a week to test, as well as putting on the sensor each practice and game. So from them, the reception's been fantastic, and they've been nice to us having us around. And speaking to other teams, I think there's just how prevalent concussions are in the media right now. They're eager to get involved, and I think especially at UBC being a research institution, the players are happy to be involved in this kind of cutting edge research.
Yeah, and we've got some interest from other teams that do want to start understanding the consequences of a concussive injury a bit better. I think maybe in the next couple of months, we're looking into using it with the rugby team at UBC.
Oh, okay.
And we'll see if that gets put together or not. But there's also been some interest from some semi-pro hockey teams.
Wow.
And so I think moving forward for not only UBC but also for research in British Columbia, I think it's a good idea.
So, Alex, I guess your research ends sooner than Harrison's, obviously. Well, not obviously, but I would think. So,
I really hope so.
so I guess the better question actually is probably for Harrison. Then, when your research ends, when your degree, when you finish your PhD, will this study, is this taken up by anybody else? Is this future generation study, or is this, I think the study will just end when you defend your PhD?
Well, I think it kind of depends on our advisor. So we're supervised by Dr. Jean-Sébastien Blouin at the university, and another co-supervisor named Gunter Sigmund, who is in industry, and he works for MEA Forensic Engineers and Scientists. And really, it's up to them. So I think once we're both graduated, if there is need for further research in the area, they definitely have the resources and obviously the know-how to do this type of research. So I can't really answer that, but I think it would be up to them. And if they did choose to do it, then I think that would be a fantastic thing for UBC to support.
As much as we're doing this research at UBC, there are other groups across the United States who are doing it, and I don't think people are as aware of it. But in the United States, the NCAA recently began a 5-year study with, I think, 35 universities of D1 schools, and they have about 3,000 participants enrolled. Oh, wow. So I think regardless of whether we continue it at UBC after this season or in the next few years, I think the research field in general will keep going forward.
Wow, that's impressive. So actually, this is just kind of a personal question, but have either of you ever had a concussion?
Yeah, so I used to play varsity rugby at the University of Guelph, and I had a couple of them there. Thankfully, nothing was too serious, but it is something that not only do I find interesting from a academic point of view, but also from a personal point of view. It's something that I've experienced. And I have had friends that have experienced. So it kind of I find it quite a cool topic to study.
Yeah, I played soccer when I was a kid, up until I started university. And I think throughout that and through some other kind of sports I've played in university, I've had one or two concussions, and I think just suffering through that type of injury, it wasn't severe, and luckily it healed quite quickly. But realizing when you had that injury how little the medical field really knows about it was something that made me want to get involved in it. And kind of, it's such a new injury. Really, only in the past 2 decades have people started to look at it, and there's so much left to be known about it that was a field I kind of wanted to get into and maybe contribute a little bit to.
Oh, great. Actually, yeah, BC seems to be on the cutting edge of it, on the advanced edge of it, because actually my brain injury occurred in Victoria, BC, but there wasn't much. This brain injury was in '03, so there wasn't very much known or attention paid to brain injury at that point. But the UBC obviously UVic took UVic too, but Victoria General Hospital took good care of me, and they have a great system for head trauma. And in Vancouver, the Gorge Hospital has it too, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so you guys, so this team is practicing today, and tomorrow they play on Saturday, right?
Yeah, so they've got a practice today. Friday they have a walkthrough. So that will be a non-contact walkthrough because they don't want guys to get banged up.
And you guys won't put any head tensions on them then?
For walkthroughs, no, just because there's no hitting and there's no impacts. But then the game is on Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern.
Yep.
And so we'll have them ready to go for that.
Okay, cool. So, are you on the sidelines, or are you? Well,
what we have to do. Well, what we have to do during the games is take detailed notes on our players and what's happening to them. And the reason why is what we do is we go back and we look at the game feed of the video. We look at the readings from the sensors, and we try and look for any false positives or false negatives in the data. So, for example, if we see on the patch that there's a massive hit at 154, and that happens to be halftime, and the guy's just walking around the locker room, then we know that we need to remove that from the data.
Yeah.
And so we're constantly kind of taking notes and looking at our guys and making sure that when we go back to look at the data, we can clean it up and make sure that most of what we're receiving is going to be real.
Before our goal, or our first kind of goal, is to make sure that what we're seeing and the impacts are correct. And I think we don't want to rush to any conclusions between relationships between impact exposure and neurocognitive deficits until we're sure that what we're seeing in the impact exposure are accurate readings. So that's the first part of this project, is to really validate this new technology that's been coming out and make sure that it does give a reliable measure of what the athletes, the accelerations that are occurring to the athlete's skull.
So speaking of actually validating, sorry, that was a weird echo. Speaking of validating the results, do you guys talk to players or trainers during or after the game about the types of hits?
Well, yeah, we'll talk to the players. So basically, once a week, we sit down with all of our players and we do a full battery of concussion testing. And so that'll include a number of different concussion tests, not only ones that are mandated and gold standard, but also kind of some of the newer technology coming out to test. And what we try and do is obviously relate impact exposure to those test results. The idea being, if somebody is concussed, we would expect scores to be worse. But also, for example, there might be situations where we're looking into subconcussive injury. So that's an injury where somebody is not clinically diagnosed with a concussion, but there might be some sort of deficit neurologically. And so when we talk to the players, we tell them at the beginning of the year that there is no contact between us and the medical staff. So if the players are in the middle of the game and they've received a hit and the trainer goes over, they might say, "Oh, I'm fine, let me continue to play." even though they know that there might be a problem, and that's something that just normally happens in sports such as football.
Yeah.
But we tell them at the beginning of the year, and we always reiterate to them, like, you guys can say anything to us. Anything that you tell us will not get back in any way to the medical team. We cannot pull you from a game. We cannot give any information to anybody. And so I suspect what we're going to see is guys that are maybe telling one thing to the medical staff and then something different to us.
Okay.
And that's kind of something that we've worked into our ethics for the study, with the idea of getting an actual real picture of what's happening rather than from a medical perspective, which may not be correct.
If you look at some of the studies that have been done in the United States, they've reported about 50% of concussions go unreported by the athletes for a variety of reasons, but the main two being that athletes want to continue playing while injured, and the second being they're unaware of what a concussion is and the signs and symptoms associated with it. So the way we've designed the study, as Harrison mentioned, is to get that true picture. We've avoided sharing our results with the medical staff and the coaches because we do want to get a true kind of snapshot of what happens to a CIS football player during a single season. And I think without delving into details, we have seen players come to us who, I don't know, they've exhibited symptoms that are not maybe indicative of a concussion, but are abnormal for a student. So we have seen players who are still playing through symptoms of large hits. Yeah, there's who, I don't want to say whether they're hurt or not, but they've been deviated from their baselines.
Yeah, and also we've had players come up to us and ask us for kind of advice on what to do in these situations, and what we've been telling them is that we're not medical professionals. We are not able to provide any information on this. And if they want to get information on this, they should go talk to their doctors. But yeah, so we're not sharing any information and we're not giving any advice.
Okay. Well, actually, that concludes my range of questions there. But did you guys want to thank some people or some organizations?
Yeah, so we wanted to thank Dr. Jean-Sébastien Blouin, obviously, at the University of British Columbia.
And thanks, I'll jump in there. I would like to thank him too, because he connected us, because I emailed him after I read Sonny Dillon's article in the Globe and Mail. So,
right, yeah. So he's coming out here today to Quebec for the game. And he's based out of the UBC Sensory Motor Physiology Lab at the UBC School of Kinesiology. Also, Gunter Sigmund, our co-supervisor at MEA Forensic Engineer and Scientists. And then lastly, the foundation that is funding the study, which is the Canadian Chiropractic Research Foundation.
Well, thank you. Thanks a lot, and thanks to those organizations as well. I'll definitely be watching this game on Saturday, I can tell you that. So thanks guys so much for being a part of this, and I guess you guys have a practice to attend soon.
Yeah.
But I get a practice, but thanks again, and hopefully people listening will find this information very valuable.
So definitely.
Thanks for having us, Nick.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks. Thanks again to Alex and Harrison, and good luck to them and their research. I look forward to watching the game this weekend. The music at the beginning of this podcast is by Ben Sound. www.bensound.com.